Well, good morning. You all quieted down so well, I guess we'll get started. The librarians are right on time. So I'm Ken Wiggin, the Connecticut State Librarian, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the state capitol and to the first Connecticut Dialogue on Public Libraries. In point of fact, this is the first state-level dialogue on public libraries since the Aspen Institute issued its groundbreaking report, Rising to the Challenge, Re-envisioning Public Libraries last fall. It's a real honor that Connecticut has been selected by the Aspen Institute as a pilot state. This opportunity comes at a pivotal time for the state library and the libraries around Connecticut. In 1893, the General Assembly in this building passed the first law allowing for the establishment of free public libraries in Connecticut. It didn't take long for Connecticut communities to act, and that legacy is some of the most heavily used public libraries in the country. In the first report of the Public Library Committee, they noted that public libraries are an efficient means of education, ought to be easily within the reach of every person in the Commonwealth, especially should the advantages of a good library be proffered to every child. And while those words still have great resonance in the 122 years that have transpired, public libraries in Connecticut and across the country have been in a state of continuous change, responding to the changing needs of our society and their communities. And while remaining trusted community anchors, providing a wide array of resources and services to all, today our state faces great challenges. Our local communities face great challenges. Our residents face great challenges, and libraries face great challenges. How successfully we rise to the challenge will depend to a large degree on how successfully communities, policymakers, and librarians engage in re-envisioning the library. Today is an opportunity for libraries to engage policymakers, business leaders, and civic partners from across the state to explore new proposals, partnerships, and initiatives to leverage the great assets our state has in its state library and its public libraries. Today's dialogue would not be possible without the hard work of Amy Garmer, Director of the Aspen Institute on Public Libraries, and her great team. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome Amy Garmer.
Thank you, Ken. I'm really delighted to be home to participate in the first pilot conversation of our initiative on the dialogue on public libraries. I'm a proud Connecticut native and spent many hours in the Wethersfield Public Library growing up. So I think it's especially touching to me to be able to create and be a catalyst for a conversation about libraries here in Connecticut. The Aspen Institute Communications and Society program, which is the home of the Dialogue on Public Libraries, created the Dialogue on Public Libraries in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Foundation's Global Libraries program to help advance the work that public libraries are doing to address community challenges and to support the transformation of public libraries for the digital age. To help us do this, the Aspen Institute brought together a select 35-member working group that met twice in the project's first year to examine the evolving societal role of the public library and to shape and advance a perspective that re-envisions public libraries for the future. So the report that you all have at your chairs and that Ken referenced, Rising to the Challenge, Re-envisioning Public Libraries, is built upon the considerable knowledge, insights, and experience shared by these experts, by these practitioners, and by these thought leaders. We also met with key library groups and with local government administrative leaders to test our themes and benefit from their suggestions to make this a stronger report. So the dialogue's perspective on the 21st century public library builds on the public library's record in strengthening communities and calls for libraries to be centers of learning, creativity, and innovation, and to be centers of civic connection in the digital age, which becomes even more important as our communities define themselves away from simply being communities based on geography. The public library really is no longer a nice-to-have amenity, but an essential part of the community's infrastructure and a key partner in sustaining the educational, economic, and civic health of the community. While the mission of public libraries hasn't changed, its role in the community is changing, and it's changing drastically. And so is its value proposition. The old library model was built around information scarcities, the high cost of storing and searching for information. That model is giving way to an emerging value proposition that is built around the public library's three key assets identified and discussed in our report: its people, its place, and its platform. This report focuses on how libraries provide access to people, how they are a place for people to convene, and how they're a platform for services for communities throughout the nation. People, place, and platform. These are the core assets that make up the heart of every public library. So I'll take a minute to define what I mean by these three things. People. The library's people reflects the shift away from building collections to building human capital in the community, to building relationships and knowledge networks. People are really at the center of the library's mission to inspire and cultivate learning, to share knowledge, and to nurture and strengthen communities. Place. So today's library is both a physical and a virtual place, but it continues to be the physical presence of the library that anchors it most firmly in the community, and the way the library offers its space and continues to be a trusted location for the community makes it a perfect anchor for economic development, neighborhood revitalization, and welcoming, connecting places that strengthen community bonds and identity. Platform. The library is user-centered. It empowers its users to determine what it provides and how they're going to use it. It's turning over the platform of the library to the community, essentially, and allowing the community to determine what its needs are and work with the library in providing a platform, tools, and resources to meet those needs. And the transformations of the digital age enable individuals and communities to create their own learning opportunities in lots of different places, and libraries are adapting to this new learning ecology. They allow innovation that platform creators can't even imagine. We think of a great library platform as a third place, which can facilitate many people interacting or just working on their own. We think that the library as community learning platform is the innovative proposition of the public library in the digital age. So as we go through the conversations today, we've put together what I think is a very exciting program. I'm thrilled with the engagement we have from state and local government, from community partners, foundations, education, and especially the library community itself. Before we move forward with our program, I wanted to stop for a minute and thank some people who were really instrumental in helping us to put together this day. First and foremost, Ken Wiggin, the Connecticut State Librarian, and his staff at the State Library, who've just been tremendous partners in identifying key participants in our programs today, and helping us to think through what this pilot dialogue, this first statewide dialogue, could mean for Connecticut and what the opportunities are here. I'd like to thank Governor Malloy and his staff, who've been really instrumental in helping us across a number of different areas, especially being able to be here in this beautiful room at the State Capitol building. Also, the Office of the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem, who helped to facilitate our use of their beautiful rooms. And then I'd also like to recognize our steering committee as we start here. We had a group of people who donated their time to help us think through what would be useful as an agenda for the first dialogue and how we might reach out to bring people into this conversation. So I'd just like to recognize the members of the Connecticut Dialogue Steering Committee, who are Chris Drake, the Assistant General Counsel in the Office of Governor Malloy, Kim Healy, the Executive Director of New Alliance Foundation in New Haven, Scott Hughes, the City Librarian in Bridgeport, Glenn Grube, the Library Director in Avon Free Public Library, Alice Knapp, the President of the Ferguson Library in Stamford, Dawn Laval, President of the Connecticut Library Association, Joanne LaRusso, the Director of the Middlebury Public Library, Matt Poland, the President of the Hartford Public Library, President and CEO, Maureen Sullivan, the past President of the American Library Association, and Zola Madison, the Program Officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Without the support and vision of the Gates Foundation and their Global Libraries team, we wouldn't be here today. So I especially thank Zola and her team. So the way we're going to work today is we have two stellar panels. They will be preceded by a stellar speaker who will set the tone for those panels and give us a sense of what this digital future that we are thinking about and talking about, what it means, what it looks like, what the implications are. Our panels will follow. And then what we're going to try and do, we've got a slight adjustment to the schedule today. With Governor Malloy's schedule, we're trying to give ourselves about a 10-minute cushion in order to break and go for lunch. So what we'd like to do is shorten our break that was originally scheduled on the agenda for about 15 minutes. So just be heads up, we'll call you back a few minutes early so that we can finish a few minutes early. In addition, in order to accommodate the fast pace of this transition and lunch with remarks for Governor Malloy, we are going to ask if anybody has questions that occur to them throughout the morning that they'd like to address to the governor's attention, something that connects to one of our panels or speakers. There are some index cards that are on the back table there, and we'd like you to write down your questions as they occur to you, as you'd like, and then put them in the basket that's on the back table. And then as we find out how much time we have once the governor has given his remarks, we can quickly pull some questions from the basket to direct to him. So that's all set. Restrooms are out, and I know the men's room is out this door and just down this hallway a little bit, and then the women's room, I guess, is on the far end. For lunch, the appropriations room, the old appropriations room, is on the far end of this floor, so we don't have that far to go. And I'm remiss in acknowledging one other very important person here in the room, and that's Ian Smalley, who's been the person who's gotten everybody here, and Ian is standing in the back there. If you have any questions or concerns about logistics or need something answered, you can feel free to see me, but see Ian as well. He's as likely to know what to do and how to get it done as anyone. So to start us off today, we have a distinguished professor in the Department of Digital Media and Design and History and Director of Digital Humanities at the University of Connecticut. Tom Scheinfeld is formerly Managing Director of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. Tom's directed several award-winning digital humanities and library-based projects, including That Camp, Omeka, and the September 11th Digital Archive. Trained as a historian of science and public historian with a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a master's and doctoral degrees from Oxford, Tom has written and lectured extensively about the history of museums and the role of history in culture. Okay. Tom is also a significant presence in the growing national dialogue on the creation of a national digital platform. There are several conversations that the federal agency, Institute for Museum and Library Services, which funds museums and libraries, have been sponsoring, looking at 20 years worth of knowledge that we have in doing digital and looking at how do we build a platform for access to digital content and to one another. I think it's very exciting. We've cited it in our own report that the Connecticut government has created a statewide digital platform, or is in the process of creating a statewide digital platform. I think that's a model for what we can look at nationally, at creating nationally. So, without further ado, I welcome University of Connecticut Professor Tom Scheinfeld.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Ken. I'm really very pleased to be here. And I'm pleased to join them in welcoming you to this Connecticut Dialogue on Public Libraries. Now, my wife warned me against this. I am a horrible joke teller, and I rarely start my presentations with a joke, but I thought I'd give it a shot today. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of any jokes about libraries or librarians, and I was at an open house this weekend at UConn, and I asked my colleagues if they had any jokes about librarians, and they couldn't think of any either. So I did what you do, right? I went to Google and I Googled librarian jokes, and I didn't get much further there. There were a couple about metadata. I didn't think that would go over very well. There was one about interlibrary loan, again, not too funny. None of them were really any good. I even thought about telling one about the Dewey Decimal System, but I couldn't see the point. Okay. Terrible. Anyway, that aside, I'm honored to be here today, all the more so because I am not a librarian. Although most of my career as a historian and digital humanist has been spent working with libraries and librarians on problems of mutual interest, such as how digital technology can help us reach new audiences, how we can help those audiences make sense of online collections, how we can build software that connects people to collections, and in general, how faculty members and librarians can work together to serve online publics who don't see or really care about the disciplinary differences and distinctions that separate us. But because I'm not a librarian, I don't here thinking that I can teach you anything of substance, something that you don't already know about libraries. But what I hope I can do this morning is provide some touchstones to help structure our thinking today, some thought technologies for the day. In recent years, as the Aspen Institute report shows, and as I think we all know, libraries have been called upon to step in and solve some of society's most urgent and intractable problems. For example, training a 21st century workforce where the educational establishment has failed to do so. And despite this tall order, libraries have, for the most part, been remarkably successful, and we're here today to explore ways to continue and expand these efforts. Yet as we do so, we should be wary of falling into something referenced in the report and something David Lankus at Syracuse University has called the deficit model of service provision, a term that Amy introduced me to recently, but a principle against which I have structured most of my work over the years with libraries. Lankus warns us against falling into the trap of simply filling gaps, of providing services that our patrons can't access, but in fact may be more appropriately provided elsewhere. Instead of this reactive pose, Lankus argues, the library should proactively play to its strengths and demonstrate its worth based on what it does best, not on how it can make up for what other institutions do poorly. To some extent, technology, the kind of technology I work with, can help us out of the deficit model box and do both things, help society meet its unmet needs, but do so by drawing on the traditional strengths of the library. One example of how we might use digital technology to square this circle is a project that I'm working on with my UConn colleague Clarissa Siglio and colleagues at the Hartford Public Library, including Matt and Brenda Miller. This collaboration is called Find Your Voice, and it aims to provide a nationally replicable model for the integration of libraries' cultural heritage collections with their civic engagement program. And it was very generously sponsored and funded by IMLS while Susan was there. Like many large urban libraries, HPL has both a vigorous set of programs for stimulating public discourse, building bridges between community groups, and providing 21st century skills. It also has a robust archival collection and set of attendant research services. Indeed, HPL is a national leader in both areas, yet even at HPL, much less at less dynamic and well-provisioned institutions, these efforts seldom overlap, let alone enrich one another. Right? The archival collections, the special collections, the stuff of the library, and the programs, the kind of community outreach programs, are separate. Too often, that's the case. And this is a problem. First, if the gap between civic service and heritage collection stewardship is allowed to deepen, libraries stand to become a house divided, a state contrary to healthy institutional growth. Second, the divide often extends to the populations being served. We have one set of programs for scholars, researchers, and other specialists that avail themselves of the heritage collections, while civic literacy work concentrates on minority, immigrant, disadvantaged, and other community populations. Allowing these kinds of divisions to remain unexamined runs counter to the modern public library's ethic of equal and open access. So the Find Your Voice project will aim to use digital technology to remediate this unhealthy situation, strategically joining the extensive archival materials of the Hartford History Center with the civic literacy goals of the library's nationally recognized The American Place program. Building on these strong but as yet disconnected foundations, Find Your Voice will use internet technology to engage a diverse public in exploring historic individuals who found their civic voice through poetry, performance, and other expressive forms. And in addition to situating present-day community members within a centuries-long tradition of civic involvement, Find Your Voice will empower users to discover how they too can help build a more equitable democratic society at the community level. This will be achieved through mobile web applications and multimedia experiences that connect the past traditions of civic engagement that are represented in the archival collections to contemporary concerns and strategies for civic engagement. So using technology to bridge a gap in our programming, to provide a solution to that deficit model of service provision. But I didn't really come here to talk about technology per se, or technology as a tool for bridging that gap, because as much as I believe the technology of the internet can help us escape some of the more pernicious effects of the deficit model of service provision and proactively integrate our existing strengths to meet changing societal conditions, I nevertheless believe that it's not the technology of the internet that's most important to us, but the model of the internet. That the model of the internet can help us more than the tools of the internet. I've said many times before that 21st century institutions of all stripes work best when they look like the internet. That is, when they are organized and networked along the same distributed lines as the internet itself. When Vint Cerf and Robert Kahn developed TCP/IP, the data transfer protocol that underlies the internet more than 40 years ago, and again when Tim Berners-Lee designed the World Wide Web more than 25 years ago, their primary insight was to place all of the content creation, indexing, and other application-specific functions at the endpoints of the network, and to allow the network simply to handle the data transfers. They saw that making the endpoints, the nodes, smart, and the network itself dumb, would enable greater ease of information sharing, a flourishing of connections between users and their data, and thus a free-flowing web of creativity. The distributed system of internet plus web was in stark contrast to the centralized, managed computer networks that dominated the 1980s and early 1990s, networks like CompuServe and Prodigy, which managed all content and functional applications at the center. This central design principle of the internet, sometimes called the end-to-end principle, states that most features of the network should be left to users to invent and implement, that the network should be as simple as possible, and that complexity should be developed at its endpoints, not at its core. That the network should be dumb and the terminals should be smart. This is precisely how the internet works. The internet itself doesn't care whether the data being transmitted over it is a sophisticated Flash interactive or a plain text document. Both the complexity of Flash and the simple output of text are handled at the endpoints on your personal device. The internet just moves the data around. In my experience, cultural heritage projects function best in the new media environment of the 21st century when they adhere to this design principle, technically, structurally, and administratively. Cultural heritage works best in the 21st century when content is created and functional applications are designed, that is, when the real work is performed at the nodes, in local institutions, and when the management functions of the system are limited to establishing communication protocols and keeping open pathways along which work can take place, along which ideas, content, collections, and code can flow. That is, cultural heritage projects in the internet age and cultural heritage organizations in the internet age work best when they are structured like the internet itself, the very network upon which they operate and thrive. In my own work, the success of that camp, the Humanities and Technology Camp, a distributed, decentralized model for organizing local digital humanities unconferences that was pioneered by me and my colleagues at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media, and that has grown to nearly 200 locally organized, locally hosted, locally funded events worldwide, has demonstrated the truth of this proposition. You provide the protocols, you provide the information, you provide the channels along which information can flow, but you leave it to the endpoints to do the real work. Likewise, where DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America, has succeeded while other similar efforts have failed, it's because of the decentralized model of coordination, because it looks like the internet. In these cases, as in so many other digital cultural heritage efforts, the internet, as Tim Brown, CEO of the Bay Area design consultancy IDEO, writes, the internet is not so much a means as the model of new forms of organization taking shape. Thus, even though I'm a technologist, I'd rather hear today, at this event, about how the models of network information can help us structure our work and relationships to mutual benefit, rather than talking about how the technology of the internet and big data and related tools can help us perform specific functions. I'd like to hear how network dialogues, such as this one, can allow us to work together and share knowledge and resources in the way that the internet has stitched together literally hundreds of millions of servers together to provide end users with a seemingly seamless experience. I'd like to explore how the network, how this kind of network that's gathered here today, can model productive collaboration among us. So one last and very much related note to help us think about what we're doing today. As you know, as Ken said, this is the first of a planned series of regional dialogues to be hosted by the Aspen Institute, and I believe it's especially appropriate that it's being held in Connecticut. Not only do we boast some of the leading lights in the library field, including Ken himself, president of COSLA, and Matt, chair of the Urban Libraries Council, but I think structurally, right, in terms of network, Connecticut is the perfect place to test new modes of network collaboration, the kinds of modes of network collaboration I've been talking about. I don't think there's anywhere else in the country where you can find a more diverse set of communities, economically, ethnically, industrially, educationally, packed into so small a geographic area. Moreover, no state in the nation has the kind of jurisdictional complexity of Connecticut. Yes, that is a problem, but it is a problem to be solved, and it's an opportunity in this case. With 169 separate towns, each with its own library infrastructure, but each no more than 75 miles apart away from any of the others. This unique geography and institutional situation offers us an opportunity to test new modes of network collaboration, new partnerships, new models of network labor and resource provision that aren't available in larger, maybe simpler places. That is, we have in Connecticut a unique opportunity to help the entire field of public libraries here and across the nation to start looking more like the internet. So I just want to thank the State Library and the Aspen Institute for this opportunity, and I hope we seize that opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I think that just hit the bullseye for the kinds of issues that we want to bring up today. It's about making connections. It's about looking at ways of using technology to bridge gaps and to provide a solution to the deficit model that threatens libraries, really, to becoming just social service providers and not critical knowledge institutions. As Tom pointed out, it's not so much the technology, though, but the model of the internet, which challenges us here today to think about how we can make connections between and among the communities that are represented here so that we're not, in Tom's words, a state divided, trying to figure out what are we going to be and what are we going to do. So to help us on our way, we're going to move into the first panel, which is looking specifically at issues of the library alignment with education, youth, and families. And to help us explore these issues, we have, first I'll be calling up in, this is just alphabetical order here, Susan Hildreth. Susan she assumed the position of the executive director of the Peninsula Library System out in California very recently on March 1st. Prior to that, she was the director of the Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is a presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed post, where she served for a 4-year term and led the agency that is the primary funder for museum and libraries across the country through a really incredible tenure of supporting all kinds of library programs and is noted in particular for STEM and education related. So Susan, we want to welcome you up. Matt Poland, the Chief Executive Officer of the Hartford Public Library. Matt joined the Hartford Public Library in June 2008 as Deputy Administrator and was appointed the library's 9th leader since 1893 and its first Chief Executive Officer in October 2009, which I think is a great recognition of really the role and the expansiveness and the leadership role of the head of the library in the city of Hartford. So welcome Matt to come up. Dianna Wentzell. Dr. Dianna Wentzell has been an educator in Connecticut for over 25 years. She was appointed the Interim Commissioner of Education in January 2015, but she began her career in education, teaching social studies and directing programs for gifted students, has served as the Connecticut State Department of Education's Chief Academic Officer, and as the Assistant Superintendent of Schools in Hartford. Among her many accomplishments, we welcome Dianna, I'm sorry. And Jim Wadleigh. Jim was named the Chief Executive Officer of the Access Health CT, or Access Health Connecticut, the health exchange, in February 2015. I must say my compliments coming from Maryland. The Connecticut exchange is just stellar. Served as the exchange's acting Chief Executive Officer from September 2014 to February 2015 when he was appointed CEO. He also served as the exchange's CIO, providing direction and oversight for information technology that supports the exchange's strategic direction. So we welcome Jim to talk about the library role in health provision. And last but not least, our moderator for, I'm sorry, you're right, I've missed one more. I'm sorry, Mayor Toni Harp. I don't seem to have the bio here, so I apologize. I assume she needs no further introduction than than Mayor of New Haven. I will say one of the things that's really gotten me interested. I don't know that it's a topic of the conversation we'll have here today, but Mayor Harp has been leading a group of local officials to develop a gigabit network across the state, working with state officials as well, and one of our colleagues at the former colleagues at the Aspen Institute, our fellow Blair Levin, and I think that vision, looking at the future, is a great kind of vision for towns like New Haven and across Connecticut. And then our moderator, Charlie Firestone. Charlie is the executive director of the Aspen Institute Communications and Society Program and vice president of the Aspen Institute.
This is, thank everybody for coming. This is a great opportunity for us at the Aspen Institute to engage in dialogue at the regional level, which we've all pointed out. And we're looking at Connecticut seriously as a model for other regional dialogue in this area. So hopefully this will lead to that. And really impressed with the panel. The idea of this
that there are opportunities, regardless of opportunities available, to learn in many other places. And the library, I think, is a great supporter of the work that is done in our education system.
And you're in charge of education in the state. And how do you look at the needs of an educational agenda, particularly beyond the school? And let me just put in a plug. We had another task force that was on learning and the internet. And it said that the learner, if you don't look at it as education, you look at it as learning, then you put the learner at the center, and school is one place where we learn. But there's museums, libraries, at home, online, after school, all these other places where people learn. And so tell me how the Department of Education thinks about both in school and out of school.
It's a great question for having us here. One of the areas that's really changed in our thinking about our role with our communities, with our families, and with our children is that we spend a long time on the borrow this Jackson model in trying to catch kids up, trying to make up so that we can have an even playing field. And what we recognize now is we need this new generation approach and an approach that is well beyond the schoolhouse and a network approach with our communities to make sure that all of our kids are getting the benefits of the resources of their communities. When we look at our Alliance District approach, which is an approach where we intensify our support around our 30 lowest performing districts, we look at what resources exist in those districts. And it's a perfect example of the depth of a community and the improvements, the educational improvements that the city is able to largely come about through a community that's wrapped around things. So we need to really, in our next iteration of thinking around the local department, think about how we become more of a catalyst for that and less focused on just the bounds of the schools.
So a lot of educators find that children come to school not well nourished, that their health and wellness is an important aspect of what is ready to learn. So that brings us to the health system. And how the Connecticut health system is, what are your greatest needs right now in terms of bringing up particularly the underserved communities and getting access to health services?
So first, I want to say thank you for inviting me to this update. And as with regards to the needs of the health system, we could probably spend weeks and months talking about the opportunities that abound for improving there. What we found most specifically with Library Association really comes around people are looking for trusted advisors, and with Access Health, we've been fortunate enough that we feel that we've kind of become the trusted advisor with our customers. So that synergy that goes along with the libraries, they are really central locations in town. They are people that the community has grown to trust and feels comfortable with. We touched upon some of the earlier things, the technology that is constantly changing. The libraries offer that location for support on technology. The libraries offer, we all know that all of you are very educated and have been able to pick up some of the pieces around, two pieces going on in my role specifically. You've got the whole concept of medical. You have the whole concept of private healthcare insurance that, as we talked a little earlier, was spoken earlier, related to people. So this is people. The people in the libraries are able to help answer questions where we are just not big enough to be able to be out in all of these 169 communities. The libraries are. So they are centrally focused, and we have found through last year
an incredible increase in enrollment just through the library, so that we can see that the libraries are
That's
helping.
great. So feeding right into Amy's people, place, and platform, you know, the people who are there who can advise, the place where they can go. And the item I wanted to react to your excellent opening talk is networks, and the internet works also with platforms. Maybe that's what you meant by nodes, but you know, the key elements of the networks and of the internet are the platforms that enable people to move in whatever direction they want to. So whether it's Facebook and creating something, or eBay or Alibaba or whatever, it's being able to go on and use these platforms for to advance in your particular area. So a place like no other that the library tends to be. So how do you view these various services that already are coming into your library even without proactive engagement to get them there? Matt.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank everyone also for having me here today from the Hartford Public Library. It is a place like no other, but as we tell everyone, that's defined by our community, not by the library. And I think the issue of platforms and where we're going is coming from active engagement. I think waiting for the internet to happen to the library is a serious mistake, and that we need to make sure that we're turned outward to the community, turned outward to the Board of Education, to the city, to determine exactly how we can best connect with the citizens. This is a time, I think, where, as Mayor Harp mentioned, you know, we're also a city in a county, a very, very wealthy county, where the people in Hartford are not exposed to the kinds of services that the people in the suburbs are used to, and have in some ways considered part of the routine. And so we need to really have the doors wide open, to be listening very carefully to what our government has got on their agenda, what the state government, the federal government has on the agenda, so that our people can be connected in a way that those institutions will speak to them.
So Susan, in your prior capacity as running the IMLS, the grant-making authority in the federal government to libraries and museums, how did you envision these cooperative relationships that libraries can offer, particularly in the areas of education, which I know is an area that you've really thought a lot about, particularly early education, and then any others if you want to add?
Well, you know, thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and back to the East Coast, having recently relocated to California. I have to just say to everybody, I was born in Bridgeport. A lot of great people coming out of Connecticut, so we're happy to be here. And, you know, I think that at the federal level, you know, the networks of libraries that we see, particularly here in Connecticut, are really exciting, because we build on the assets that each of us have to really create a better result. But in terms of working at the federal level, I think one of the things that I was able to do, and a great example of a successful on-the-ground activity, is the Hartford Public Library. But for instance, at the federal level, we were able to develop relationships with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, a small but mighty agency that really brought the focus of libraries and museums at the federal level to other partners. So we work closely with the Department of Education, particularly Health and Human Services. We worked with the Department of Labor on a number of issues. We developed a partnership with an organization called BUILD, which provides technical assistance for early child care providers, and really focused on how our libraries could help those early child care providers reach the successes that they needed to reach. So I think in terms of education and families, and really many different topics that we're going to be talking about today, the library has the capacity to reach out to local, state, and even national partners and model a great partnership to make a huge difference to our communities. Because really no matter what the service or the topical area is, the library has the platform, the network, the capacity to connect individuals to whatever they need to help them successfully in their lives. And we particularly, I think, have a unique role in the pre-K world, because that's a world that we really can own in a way different than the later years, when we also work closely with our peers in our colleagues in education. So, working particularly in pre-K, helping those kids get a great start, which is the most important thing, I think, to have successful communities. The libraries can play a key role.
Let's talk about pre-K for a little bit. I think it's a good area where you can look at the needs of the community. So much of preparation for really lifetime education goes on before you ever get to a school. And yet, as we said, there are issues, and there's preparation for reading, there's opportunities for cooperation between schools, libraries, and other institutions. So let me throw it back to Dianna. What can we do more to get the students ready to get to your schools? And who needs to be involved?
Well, when we think about our youngest learners and we think about their first teachers, those are really parents.
Yeah.
And we think about outreach to parents starting from as early as possible, and that's a natural connection for community organizations, for our libraries, for our communities in general. One of the most important things is that there's already so much there that can be of support for our families and for our youngest learners. When we look at our efforts in Connecticut around our youngest learners, over the last several years, Governor Malloy's administration has put significant emphasis on early childhood education. And we've come together to have an Office of Early Childhood, which is its own agency that we work very closely with. A lot of the focus of the work in the Office of Early Childhood is on a two-generation approach, that we support our youngest learners to be ready to read when they get there through an intergenerational approach and through really networking with all the different agencies that support those learners. One of the most important things I think about is that so often the educators in the community are unaware of the richness and resources that are available at the local public libraries. An example from my own practice, I have been in schools and districts for most of my career, and about 6 or 7 years ago was responsible for ELL learning in a community. And in fact, I'll give a shout out to the local public library in South Windsor. I know Director Marietta is here. I was in that community at the time, and in the time I was there, we went from having a single-digit ELL population to really having a huge surge, which is typical in Connecticut now, and multilingual. A lot of our efforts around preschool focused on reading with children. And we recognized that with linguistic diversity of over 70 languages present, that was going to be an approach that we needed to modify. And we didn't really know how. And we didn't have the school professionals that spoke those languages. Our local public library helped us understand some of the internet-based things that they already had, like tumble books, would be available, and that the parents could have the same experience of having the child on their lap reading a book with tumble books doing the reading. And I don't mean to be brand specific, it's just one I happen to remember. So I think sometimes it's really connecting families to the richness that's there in our libraries and really having the conversation to say what would be helpful.
So Mayor Harp, I know that you have a background in social justice here in the state, and also you're on the Board of Education. I guess you have that direct connection. And obviously, there are a lot of people who don't have the same experience of having their children, being able to read to their children, and the underserved. How do you feel that the library is doing with respect to that issue in New Haven, and what can be done?
Our librarian is here too, Martha Brogan. Raise your hand, Martha. We are.
Put you on the spot.
One of the things that we do with early childhood is that we have a bookmobile that goes around to neighborhoods that don't have libraries, but go specifically to family daycare homes and to child care centers. to her child. And so that is happening here in Connecticut, especially at our community healthcare centers. So I think those are really important things that can be done. The other thing that our library does too is it worries, especially if there isn't high literacy in a family, that after school in the summertime that there's actually a little drift that occurs. And so in New Haven we have a DIG reading program that has been very successful in minimizing that drift in the summertime, and it's been something that has worked very well with students who have English as not their primary language.
I think New Alliance is the director of New Alliance Foundation. I believe you've got a program in that very area that is connecting and that school drift. And so that reminds me that we are going to go to the audience. There's a lot of knowledge and important, not just questions, but comments that might come out of the audience. So we are going to go and ask you to be a part of this dialogue. That's the whole idea. So actually, let me turn it back to Susan, because Susan, I think you have been involved in this connection during the summer and between schools and libraries for early education, that maybe you can call out some other ways that libraries, the role of libraries are important in that activity.
You know, I think libraries are key partners in working against the summer slide, as we know it to be, and also not being brand conscious. But I'm going to call out two programs that also are making a big difference, I think, that have some involvement in Connecticut. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is a national program that has many library partners that really is focusing on that summer slide to really keep kids up on their reading skills during the summer. Another activity that I want to call out, what I'm really excited about, was during the final days of my tenure at IMLS, we were able to support an investment with an organization called Reach Out and Read, and Connecticut is one of the states that we're working deeply in with Reach Out and Read. Reach Out and Read is a pediatric organization that pediatric literacy, they completely support and believe in parents as first teachers, reading as critical skills, and working with pediatricians across the country. Reach Out and Read make sure that free books get into the hands of particularly under-resourced or some of our low-income families. So I also just want to mention that I think that role of the library as a trusted institution gives us a very special entree and relationship with the parents and caregivers, and we can really establish a trusted relationship and help them be comfortable and knowledgeable about being their child's first teacher. That family engagement, the two-generation strategy is absolutely critical, because we need those parents to be engaged in and involved in their children's success.
But Susan, as you look at this, are you finding that schools and libraries are cooperating in this? Is that an issue that from your national perspective?
I think it is, it's really beginning to occur more and more. And I think, we're so excited to have a school representative here. And some of on the ground, sometimes the library school thing does not always, it takes a while to get us to be good partners. We have different approaches to working. But I think as we're really focusing on kids' success, those partnerships are becoming more and more useful and common, particularly in terms of summer learning, because I do think that our schools, who may not have the capacity to provide a lot of programming in the summer, are really seeing that the libraries can fill that role. And I know in some states, the libraries are also working with USDA to provide lunches in the summer for low-income kids. So oftentimes the school campuses are not necessarily available in the summer, and those lunches, the amount of kids who get the free or reduced lunch in the summer drops dramatically. So I know it's really, of course, for kids to learn and be effective, they have to be well fed. So that partnership in terms of providing that access to the reduced meals during the summer between schools and libraries is a really good one that I know is going to in effect all around the country.
So, Matt, there's also kids who are homeschooled and in not a part of the traditional school system, whether it's parochial schools or other. How are you finding that your library is dealing with, for example, homeschooling and other non-traditional school children when we get to the issue of how they're educated and ready for learn and as a learning venue?
That's an interesting question, a very specific one about the connection with education. And our staff works with homeschooled parents, although in Hartford there aren't many of them in the city. But they do work with them in terms of providing them with technical assistance for learning and courses that they might have. I'd like to just address, though, the issue of the education connection, which I think is
important.
important.
You're on the board, right? Aren't you?
I am.
Both on the Board of Education and the
right,
librarian.
right. It's sort of an unusual, and it's had some tough days, for sure. But the important thing that happened here in our city is that the pressure for funding is so significant. 8 years of no increase to the city of Hartford's education system, and a minor, tiny, infinitesimal increase to the libraries over that period of time have caused us to become partners in order to leverage what we've got. And the good news there is that instead of looking at what happened in the schools with about 70% of their school libraries being closed in a city that has the worst achievement gap in the United States, it seems counterproductive, right, to do that kind of thing. We can spend a lot of time worrying about, how are we going to get the money to reopen all the libraries? Or we can spend time between the public library and the public schools determining what's 21st century library service look like. And does it look like classrooms? Does it look like media specialists and public librarians? Is there a combination that is at play here that connects better the two institutions that, as Susan pointed out, have had ups and downs over time, connecting well with one another.
So that reinforces the connections instead of collections. I mean,
does.
how you can connect those.
It does. And so you look at the summer learning programs, for example. 4 years ago, before we began a partnership in earnest with the school system, we had in the library 350 youngsters who participated in a traditional summer reading program. And the only thing we heard from the schools at the time was, make sure that our books that are on the list are in your library. That was the charge from the schools. About 4 years ago, we decided to begin this process of summer learning in March. And we started working with the schools in March, and we finished sort of technically in October. In 1 year, we went from 300 to 4,000 youngsters registered and parents and teachers involved in this process. And last summer, it was 6,300. That is directly attributed to the partnership. There is no way either organization could have done that. And so that partnership, though, wasn't wait until we're in misery. It was, we are headed towards a change that we need to get our arms around. And so it was a planned way to look at how we were going to work together. I think that's critical wherever we are, whether we're in a big system like Hartford or New Haven, or whether we're in a smaller system like Colchester, right? It's a really important thing to think about how we're going to make those things happen.
And Dianna, are there is there movement afoot to create more partnerships between the education and libraries along the lines of what Matt just mentioned?
Well, I think one of the things that's so remarkable about what's going on in Hartford is the year-round collaboration between professionals in the school system and at the library, and really having deep conversations about what are the goals of summer learning. So we're not counting books anymore. It's not about getting parents to sign off on just how many books a child's read, but what are the goals of really stopping summer slide. The Council of Chief State School Officers has sponsored a summer learning challenge that former Commissioner Pryor signed off on last year, and I will again this year, that commits the resources of the state education agency as well to the partnership between libraries and schools. And it really adds some state it links in some existing statewide electronic resources that support kids to read books that stretch them, and supports parents to help kids choose books appropriately, and also directs folks to their local libraries, because it's also that idea of the trusted partner and a place that you feel comfortable. And the more comfortable our community members feel in their public libraries, the more they'll be able to access all the resources. We've talked a lot about early learning, and that's critically important, in summer reading. But a huge gain over the last 4 years in Connecticut has been an almost 5% increase in our graduation rate. The increase has been the largest in communities like New Haven. We recently celebrated our most recent numbers at a high school in New Haven. And a lot of that has been through a networked approach of what kids need beyond the school day to be successful. One of the things that many people don't know is that there is SAT preparation available through our public libraries at their websites. And that's one of the ways in which we can serve all of our kids and even the playing field, so that all of our kids leave our public schools college and career ready.
So evening the playing field has been a theme, and I know, Mary, you've been a strong advocate for that. Are you feeling that more canon should be done? Or?
Well, you know, one of the things that I wanted to point out is a program that we work with the state library on in about 5 cities in our state. It's called Concepts for Adaptive Learning. And basically what it does is recognize that there is a digital divide, and it makes computers available to low-income families, but the family doesn't get the computer until the parent actually is trained on the computer, learns where there are resources to support the child's education, and completes that training. I think it's about 6 weeks. Then they get the computer, they get access to low-cost internet. And I think that that is one way in which the state library is actually helping to improve educational outcomes and linking technology to those who wouldn't have access to it.
And it looks like there's a direct success story with New Haven that they just shouted out.
And yes, New Haven's graduation rate has gone up 17.9%. So we are really very, very excited about
from
how,
when to when? From what?
Well,
point
I think it's been from 2010 to now.
Wow. Okay. Let's turn to health again, because as we said, you know, children who are malnourished or not sufficiently nourished are not going to be good learners. And getting back to this question of equal access, do you feel that there's more that can be done towards getting people signed into the health exchanges, and what is Access Connecticut doing? Access Health.
For sure, my wife gets it wrong every day. So, and she hears me talk about it much more than she wants to. For sure, there is a lot more opportunity for access to healthcare in Connecticut. First and foremost, just because I provide access doesn't mean anyone or everyone can even afford the access that they're getting. So that in itself is, we are providing the ability to acquire healthcare, but I kind of view it where that's kind of become the table stakes. Next step is, how do we educate our customers on, in all of our residents and our communities, on what exactly healthcare is? So if I look around the room, most of you probably understand what a deductible, what a copay, what health insurance in general is. For the most part, most of the customers that we are now serving, this is the first time they've come into that process, and we now need to educate them on how to use it. And that's going to take years. And I see the role of the library system playing a critical part in being able to do that. Excuse me. As we continue through that, right now we are in the middle of performing a survey that we expect to come out the other side, and I really want to have Connecticut have the lowest uninsured rate in Connecticut. Will it get to 0? No. My gut tells me we're going to be in the 2 to 3% range remaining in Connecticut. And what we're finding is a lot of those individuals and families are, English is not their main language. So we'll be shifting our gears this summer. We're already working through a new marketing campaign, and that will start with from start to finish, how we get all the way out. That marketing campaign on how to reach into the inner cities, inner communities all over the state of Connecticut, and from a language perspective, how do we reach out to that? So there's a lot new. I think we've got what we call the low-hanging fruit. Now we've got it's going to become even more difficult to reach those families that truly need health care. And if we go back, we've talked a little bit about children. It starts with children.
Right. And how are libraries working with you to do this? Are there some examples? Is there more that needs to be done? Is this a great opportunity for both the library and the health care system?
It is. I think last year was our first time working together, and we saw a 50% increase in enrollments through the libraries. So those in those communities, East Hartford, Bridgeport, Stamford, those were our highest performing libraries for enrollment perspective. We were surprised by some of those communities that we actually thought some of the larger cities we would have seen some different results. And all that is each one, we talked a little bit earlier, each one of these communities, all 169 that are out there, all have their own little personalities and will require, I can see that the libraries, their staff, your staff, know your communities the best. So we've now, moving forward, provided that opportunity to enroll. Now comes kind of some of those next steps of how can we work together to kind of reach that from an education perspective. And we'll just continue to evolve through that process.
Good. So it's not just enrollment, it's going beyond enrollment.
It is 100. Enrollment are table stakes. It's the next steps that are critical.
Good. Matt, how about in Hartford? How's that connection between health and health needs and the library of the community?
It's a very important connection for a number of reasons. In our city, we have significant health issues among the population. The opportunity to partner not only with Access Health, but with the hospitals and healthcare providers in the city is extraordinarily a good way to do this, to leverage, again, the place where people come by the thousands, right? Probably the central place in the city or your town where people come most often is the public library. And so the opportunity to make those connections is substantial. I think that with the health issue, libraries across the country are also looking at ways to embed health information in their organization with people. So you see libraries doing nurses and social workers who are actually part of the staff and who can do this work full-time. We developed a connection just to establish this embedding with the Regional School Choice Program, which used to just run a fair at the library. And it was so successful that the State Department of Education funds a person to be at our library. And that's this person's job for many, 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 many months to deal with regional school choice. And I think the same is going to be true with healthcare. It's librarians themselves are not trained to be health clinicians, but we can partner with people who can deliver those services and limit the cost of hiring new people, building new buildings, renting new facilities, because these facilities exist already in our communities.
Susan, again, I'm going to look to your more national perspective on this issue of involving libraries in the healthcare, health access spectrum.
You know, I think particularly with the onset of the Affordable Care Act, I think libraries were very effective partners in their communities. I think in many in a great extent, what I saw was libraries determining what level of effort they could contribute. And that often is a local decision, but in some cases, libraries had their staff trained as some of the navigators. In other cases, libraries looked at their resources and created, special resources for all kinds of health issues, not just the Affordable Care Act sign-up. In some cases, meeting rooms were booked exclusively for sign-up work with the navigators or healthcare providers. So I think in terms of the health issue, we really think about this is an issue for all our communities, and what level of support or involvement does the library have the capacity to contribute. There's lots of different roles, and we all know those capacities internally in our communities, but it's really critical to know that health information is one of the most critical kinds of information we can provide and help access in our communities. And I think libraries, particularly with the Affordable Care Act effort in their communities, really raise their visibility as an important partner in the community, similar to what they did with the Medicaid sign-up several years ago. So when we have these large federal efforts as well as our local efforts, we really can help our communities succeed in those efforts.
So, Mayor, we're going to get the mic down, and then Jim will.
So we don't often think about health in terms of public health, but if you think about it, we had a really difficult winter this year. And in New Haven, we have shelters. They're overnight shelters. So the real question is, what happens to people during the day? And what our library did was to open its doors to be a warming station for people. I'm convinced that there are people who are alive today because our library was open, it was welcoming, and people had a warm place to stay. I think that's part of health. The other thing that is really important that hasn't come up, and maybe the gentleman next to me will talk about it, and that's health literacy. If you have people who read on less than a 6th grade level, they can't read their prescriptions. And they oftentimes have health problems because they can't functionally work through the healthcare delivery system. So literacy is critically important to this group as well.
Completely agree. I think getting people, back to my point about getting people enrolled, table stakes, health literacy and education is the success, true success, or failure for the Affordable Care Act, rather than right now you'll see everything out there being 10 million people enrolled. That's great, but how are we getting everyone to understand all that? I also wanted to pile on to Susan's comment about how did we get to have the libraries become our navigators. The ironic part was we started off in the Hartford Library doing healthy chats and other libraries around the state because it was the central location for these towns that we chose. And while we were walking through, in my role as Chief Information Officer, I said, holy cow, look at all those computers right at the front entrance of the library that we're coming in. That looks like a great place for us to be able to do enrollments. What can we do? And a year later, we are using the libraries to be able to do that. So that is just by getting, just myself even, walking into a library. Usually it's my daughter and my wife and my kids who are calling me up, I'm at the library, I can't talk. But that is getting in and seeing that it continues to build that momentum of how the libraries can be used for a number of the things. And that's the genesis, even just for us.
We've talked about education and health, which is the topics, but I can't resist having the mayor here and getting into civic engagement and civic participation. And what is the role? Is there an analog in the area of citizen participation in the community to the health and education stories that we've heard here today?
I think there is, actually. Phyllis Silverman is here, who works for me as well, and she has said to me on many occasions, you can't have a strong democracy without having libraries. you just can't have it. It's a place where people gather and they talk about things. It's a place of lifelong learning, and it's a really great place for people who are retired and want to think about new things. So I think it is a really important function of our democracy, and it's one of the things that makes us strong. It's one of the things that is really very underappreciated.
Matt, how about it in Hartford? Are you doing things to engage, to foster citizenship and the informed and engaged citizenry of Hartford?
Not much. We are. A number of years ago, about a dozen now, the library began to realize that with the influx of immigrants into our community, with the tremendous pressure on our education system back in those days, where 32% of our youngsters were graduating from high school, that times they were changing, and there was a need for the library to be out there in the community, causing dialogue to happen, and to begin it today dealing with this more from aspiration. What kind of a community do you want to live in? Instead of going out and having civic engagement about potholes, which is the way we started. I have to admit, it was about a topic, of something that people were worried about. Now it's about, what do you want your town to be, your neighborhood to be, and what are the impediments to that? And let's start working on putting that together. And it's not about the library actually managing that forever. It's about empowering the community to do it on their own. So we're pulling people together. They create action. They do the action, and the library moves on to do some other discussion somewhere else, because that community is connected. And we see, for example, today I was at a meeting last week, an event last week of a group called the Voices of Connecticut Adult Learners. And this was a group of people who were all illiterate, all of them, and who, by virtue of adult education programs, library programs, other kinds of things, now read and now have jobs that they've never had before. They're in higher education. These are the kinds of things, legacies, that these community conversations and connections with other organizations can get us to. So the outcomes can happen. There's no doubt. Mayor Harp has pointed out that things change, and they do, and they change for the better. We're often frustrated that it's too slow, but it's about a shift, a significant shift in how we do this together.
Let's go out to the audience, speaking of engagement. And here, all I ask is that your question or comment be relatively short, a minute or less. But you're welcome to make a comment as opposed to a question. And do we have a mic? Yes, Ian has the roving mic. So just hold up your hand and Ian will find you. And yes, go ahead. And please identify yourself first.
My name is Lawrence, and I'd like to know, what are we going to do to protect our archives of ancient buildings, because our building codes are really archaic compared to our forefathers.
I didn't hear that.
What are we doing to protect our archives of our ancient builders? The forefathers of the builders of our country built better than what we're building now, but our archives are falling apart. But they're just
archives. So actually, both Matt and Susan, perhaps. So Susan has been in a position nationally to address that, and Matt locally.
Let me just tell you that the archival issue is really important and significant for us in the library. 7 years ago, we discovered in a bunker underneath City Hall, four floors deep, I didn't even know that was there before, all of the municipal records from 1654 through about 1900 never had been seen since they had been put down there. There was no real access to them. And all of that now has been cataloged and moved to the library. So for the first time this rich history, sort of Mark Twain arguing about his taxes, are available for the public. This is really important. But the key thing is, how do you afford all of the archival costs to do this, the digitization of this material? And so as we watch so much of that sit in boxes, protected, but still in boxes, I think the future of these documents to the country are critically important. And I'm just talking about Hartford. Susan can address perhaps the entire nation. But Hartford's wealth of resources from its early days as an Indian community to its great wealth of the 1870s to where we are in 2015 has to be protected. And Tom mentioned earlier this new program that we're doing to try to do that a little better, where we take a historic voice and we compare the historic voice to a modern, contemporary civic engager, so that you try to connect these in a way that stirs the feeling of people who want to hear about history, so that perhaps there is a way to get these things funded going forward in the future. But it's an important question and one that we're grappling with.
Well, I would say not to even further complicate the matter, because the gentleman's question is a valid one. We want to make sure we preserve our historic records. And really, depending on the community and the state, national, or local level, there are all different kinds of approaches to that. We know we have a very strong program at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and our National Archivist is a librarian by training. So hooray for Mr. Ferriero, the archivist. He's doing a great job. But I think it's a real challenge. And the other two things I would mention is that as our records are becoming digitally produced initially, we have to think about how do we preserve the digital records, let alone the paper records. And secondly, when we are able to digitize materials, particularly those born digital, how do we make sure that we have preservation means in place to be able to continue to access those materials? Because think about, when 20 years ago when we were working on whatever word processing it was at the time, and we can't get to it now. Well, the same thing occurs with our digital records. So digital preservation is also very important. I think it's a topic that I'm sure Professor Scheinfeld can mention. Is just it's still getting on. It's not in many people's radar screen. They think, oh, it's digitized, it's okay. May not be the case. So it is a big topic, and it's important for us to preserve that record. And I think particularly as we're in an online world where everything is digital, people often think, well, will we want to look back on that record? And if so, how do we create it? How do we preserve it so that we can? Because, it's an important role that libraries play, preserving their community's records.
Okay, we're moving on to the next, and please identify yourself.
Sure. My name is Marianne Ott. I'm Associate Director of New Alliance Foundation, headquartered in New Haven. And I would like someone on the panel, to talk about the role of philanthropy in supporting public libraries. We at New Alliance Foundation have been investing in a summer program in 4 libraries in Connecticut to address the summer slide. And I know that there are other venues of support going out to the libraries, and I'd like someone to address that.
Well, Susan was a philanthropist before her last as a grant giver. And then I'm also going to throw it back to you and see if you have any further thoughts about that after our
Just a couple of thoughts about philanthropy in libraries. I think it's very, very critical, and over the last, let's say, 20 years, we've really seen a huge increase in the philanthropy in libraries, which is wonderful. So just, many of our libraries, particularly I'm sure in the 169 communities here in Connecticut, have friends groups. And friends groups are wonderful. They do our book sales. They're our grassroots supporters. They're just terrific folks. But to really sustain our organizations, that level of philanthropy through foundations is really, really critical. And I think sometimes it's, I think it's challenging for the library needs to identify what they consider important priorities for their communities, and then, of course, work with the philanthropic entity to determine how we can also succeed and meet their priorities. So that's important as well. But I would say most currently, in terms of my relationship with philanthropy, and I was, I guess, the largest single investor in libraries, the federal investor, and that was exciting to be in that role, although I'm not anymore. So now I'm asking, in fact, I just applied for a federal grant in my new job. But what I see in terms of dealing with philanthropy is that philanthropic organizations are very glad to support libraries and other activities, but they want to know that their investment is making a difference. So I think in terms of philanthropy, to try to determine what the collective impact is of the particular philanthropic investment and other investments in the community, and make sure that the library and the philanthropy is leveraging existing investments and other philanthropy that's going on. I think really being able to show to our investors and funders that we are making a difference and also leveraging all the other investments in the community. Matt, do you have some thoughts?
Sure. Thank you. I think the impact of philanthropy is the most critically important thing that's happened, at least in Hartford. We have a budget now that is 80% funded by the city. The other 20% comes from other sources of philanthropy, largely. All of our major programs, the American Place with Immigration, our U-Media laboratory, all of those programs came through philanthropy. The role that the city plays today in the library is to help us with infrastructure. So it pays for our buildings, it pays for our people, it pays for our collection. But the innovation, the sort of the extension of the library into the 21st century is being largely funded by philanthropy. And that's the job, I think, for us as library leaders, to talk with philanthropy about what's important for our communities, what kinds of things can you help us prove? And I think the prove piece is key. The issue with pre-K is one where we're focused on this. You know, can libraries prove that youngsters who come through their programs are reading ready for pre-K? It's no longer just acceptable to say we have the programs, and of course they would be. I think the key is to get philanthropy to help us prove it. And proving that makes the sustainability, I think, of libraries much more likely. That we can prove the connections from birth to pre-K, then the support from pre-K to grade 3, and then whatever the teens need to stay in school and to graduate, and to have a passion for something when they do that. Libraries can help do that, but the way we're funded today alone from municipalities and so forth is not enough. So philanthropy really is the key role that gets played in helping us do that.
So given that importance of philanthropy, do you think that, I'm asking it's Mary, right? Marianne. Do you think that libraries are doing enough to reach out to philanthropists, or do you think that the philanthropies are recognizing the role of libraries sufficiently?
I do think that many libraries can benefit from the professional development in understanding how to write grants, how to reach out, how to develop programs that would be appealing and interesting to funders. I want to go back a little bit to Matt's comment, and even Susan made the comment about, proving that there's impact. And one of the beauties of the program that New Alliance Foundation developed is that it's centered around the partnership between the libraries and the schools. And because of that relationship, we're able to get access to the DRA scores of the children participating at the beginning of the summer and then again in the fall, and literally measure these summer reading programs and whether or not they are in actuality affecting the summer slide. And it's just that kind of tangible data that's really getting this program the recognition I think it deserves, because it has that tangible proof. And understanding how to document and track your impact is fairly sophisticated knowledge for grant administrators to have. It's not necessarily baked into what children's librarians or head librarians have historically known how to do. And I think there's a huge need for some professional development around developing proposals and applications.
We have a world-class expert on evaluation right in the row in front of you, David Devlin Foltz. But is there, and it's always hard to show impact, quite frankly. It's a hard thing to do. One of the things I'm just going to ask as we end, which is not quite yet, but is, what is success in your particular area with respect to your relationship with libraries? I'm just feeding that so you have a chance to think about it as the panelists conclude. Other questions? Yes, right here.
Good morning. My name is Roberta LaMonica. I'm the director of the Prosser Public Library in Bloomfield. I'm proud to say that we partner with a lot of organizations to do a lot of the wonderful things that you're talking about. We partner with public schools for summer lunch programs, literacy volunteers of Greater Hartford for adult reading classes. This year we took a $15,000 cut to our budget. I know the Aspen Institute has a list of ideals for community leaders, authority people. How do we get the message out to them, the things that you're talking about today that many of us know about? How do we get this information to them? I had a town councilman say to me, I went to the Hartford Public Library. They do all these great things. And I said, yes, it's a great place. He goes, but we're not Hartford. We're Bloomfield. Why do we need a library?
Okay. So, the existential question. Matt, why don't you
Well,
respond?
we are Hartford, and we do need the money, too. But Roberta raises a great point. In my very first encounter 7 years ago with a councilman in Hartford, I got the Google question. And I had only read that before, and I thought, well, this can't be real. And so a politician, elected politician, said, "Isn't Google going to make you obsolete?" And so I knew right from the get-go that the real job, and I think many of us are performing this role now, is what is this library? Why is this key to the democracy? I think it was Mayor Harp who mentioned that earlier about the democracy, or one of the panelists. I think that it's probably the only fully democratic institution left. Fully democratic, right? Everybody comes in, nobody pays the customers, and everybody's welcome. And whatever we can do to help, we try to do that. There aren't many organizations that can operate that way any longer. And I think the key here is the Aspen Institute, the IMLS, and other institutions, the ALA, the PLA, are all important institutions in developing a consistent definition of what public libraries do in the community and why they're so important. We talk about not having lost any funding in the last 8 years, but we haven't gained any either, so we've lost it.
Okay.
And so it's a significant thing that has to be done, and I think that Roberta raises a great question.
And Mayor?
Sure. I think that that one of the things that people really have to understand is the world that we live in, which is changing faster than any other generations before us. The libraries stay on top of that change. We live in what is considered to be a knowledge-based economy. And what you learn as you grow up, you only learn a certain amount, even if you're very well educated. But if you need to become flexible and learn other things, a library is a place where you can do that. You can't do that necessarily on the internet, and as well, you get help with that in the library. Whereas you have to kind of surf around the internet on your own. So So it makes our democracy strong. It helps us adjust to living in a world that requires knowledge to navigate and to become economically viable. It provides those services. And so those are, and it supports the fundamentals of our democracy. So to not have one would be almost un-American.
Let me respond now. We did create this dialogue on public libraries really to address that question. And this report, Rising to the Challenge, Re-envisioning Public Libraries, is an attempt to at least start that dialogue, which is a continuing dialogue among libraries and other stakeholders. And the other stakeholders are the community activists, the politicians, the community leaders, the people who are the constituencies of every one of the people on this panel. And I think this panel showed that outline of that report, which is people, place, and platforms. You've talked about how the people are navigators in the library, what the role of those librarians and people placed in the libraries are. You've talked about the place of being the, this temple of democracy, and also one of the few places in a community that is neutral, that is totally democratic, that's open to everybody, equal access, and the platform of getting access to the health system, to the educational system, to the rest of the community. So there's a lot there, and ultimately it's going to take leadership in all aspects. But the librarian is an important community leader who's going to need to more and more define himself or herself as a community leader beyond being a librarian for that community. So as we wrap up, which that was my wrap up, let me just now throw this back to starting with Susan and coming down the line. What do you see as success for the library, this relationship of libraries of the future, and building these alliances and serving a learning function in their community?
So I think we've touched on this extensively already, but what I will say is that I think it's critical that the library go to various stakeholders in the community, be it education, be it nonprofit, being county health department, county labor department. Go to those organizations and their leaders and determine what do they see success as, and how can the library help them contribute to their success. And in doing that, of course, we want the library to be successful as well, but a successful library will align itself with its community priorities. And I think in that process of going to the partners and saying, we're here to help, how can we help you? It will help increase the visibility and awareness of the vast amount of resources the library has, but also take those resources and make them impactful and helpful to partners in your community, so that when you have budget time, even though I'm so sorry you lost your $15,000 and it might not make a difference, but if you had the planning department stand up and say, hey, they helped me do my neighborhood surveys or whatever it is, that could make a difference. Hopefully it will make a difference.
I just want to echo what Susan said here. I think the role of the modern day library leader is really to understand completely what his or her community is about, what the needs are from the governing group, what the needs are of the nonprofit organizations, the healthcare providers, and it's no, and this is trite because we've all heard this before. It's no longer a static organization, it's a dynamic one where the doors need to be open and we need to be out in the street more often than we're in. And it is about connecting the dots and making the library so much a part of the vascular system of the town or the city that it's seen as just a lifeblood, a life artery that is really part of a bigger whole. And that's hard work, but I think it is the leader's responsibility to really make that happen. It's going to be a journey, because the changes that government is facing, the changes that our society are facing are enormous. There really isn't a lot of money. So how do we do that requires deep conversation with people who can help do this together and to make it a more successful future.
Well, I think that I'm grateful to the Aspen Institute's framing around public libraries in terms of people, places, and platforms. And I think I'd like to suggest a couple more P's, and one is process and payoff. And I think we've already heard a lot about that today. And I want to echo Susan's comments on process, on that we come together around places where our missions are in synchronicity, and then also that we really talk closely about what we want to achieve together through the partnerships. We don't have the luxury of just partnering because everyone likes to see schools and libraries together. We have to make sure that what is the problem we're trying to solve, and what is the payoff we're looking for, whether it's increased reading scores, increased graduation rates, greater access, more families accessing, so that we're really clearly tracking our progress.
So I think Access Health Connecticut is a microcosm of everything that we've just talked about. We are one of those programs that the communities are using to reach everyone, and I would say it has been successful. Can we build upon that? Yes, we can build upon that. How do we build upon that? Those will require additional conversations with all of you and their leader and your leadership. And so I really believe this is a first step of one of many that can be taken across a broad spectrum of other types of programs.
I think that when we recognize that we've come to a point in our development as people in Connecticut that we're all lifetime learners, and libraries are successful when it supports that learning across the spectrum of the lifetime. And that's one way, and I think that the libraries really try to do that. But libraries will really be successful when they develop a cohort of advocates who are willing to knock down the doors of the General Assembly and Town Hall to assure that the resources that libraries need are there so that they can do this very important work.
So the Aspen Institute Dialogue on Public Libraries, which Amy is leading, has as its mission to create and convene dialogues among not just the library community, but the library and its outside stakeholders. But this is going to be a process, as you say. I like adding the additional P's. And it's a process that requires dialogue, a willingness to engage in dialogue, an alignment of goals and needs, particularly of outcomes as well, and ultimately of leadership. So the librarian has moved from a librarian to a community leader. Maybe they always were, but now the role of leadership has changed. Aspen is also a leadership institute, and it's no accident that we've turned to this issue on libraries as an important element, not just for libraries, but for our communities. So I want to thank this great panel, Mayor Toni Harp, Susan Hildreth, Matt Poland, James and Jim Wadleigh, and Dianna Wentzell. Thank you for a great panel.
Okay, we're going to try and make this a quick break.